behavior that they need to be successful.
Take me back, if you would, Eileen, to, because I'm intrigued by the story that Amy told about the guy who came on much stronger when he got the position. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a sense of what might have been happening to him from a personality perspective?
Sure. What sometimes happens when we are in a role that we are confident in, that we've done for a long time, it plays to certain strengths that we have, and we have more confidence about it. When we move into a role that we're unfamiliar with, if we have an underlying sense of self-doubt, that can be a trigger as well for other underlying traits. For example, somebody who has a sense of self-doubt and self-criticism and also has an underlying level of aggressiveness, well, they might have been able to use that aggressiveness positively in a role they were confident in. When they move into a role that they're less confident in, that aggressiveness comes out as a more reactive, emotional, heavy-handed approach. And it surprises people because they never saw it before, because the situation that person was in didn't tap into that trigger, so to speak.
And on the flip side, with the woman who colleagues thought that when she was just being a colleague was kind of critical, perhaps, but she seemed to want to move into that position and was willing to change her behaviors.
Well, one of the things that I wonder is if she was critical because she didn't agree with the direction that her manager or the team was going in, and once she was in a position where she had the power and the authority to make some changes, that she didn't feel the need to challenge or be critical, but rather to actually be confident in making the changes that she thought were appropriate. And so then she didn't need to use that critical nature as much because she could use something else given the position she was in.
Interesting. Why don't we turn now to the next polling question? We went through several of the potential issues for first-time managers, but I'd like to get a sense from our audience. We've got another question here. What do you think is more difficult for a first-time manager? To hire the right person, to recognize that potential in someone that they're bringing on, or to let the wrong person go? And it's a very, very difficult decision to let somebody go. What we're seeing here is about a 2-to-1 split. Sort of our audience saying to hire the right person is the toughest, most difficult. 2/3 saying to let the wrong person go. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think it taps into, all of us hate to have to let somebody go. I mean, there's nobody, I don't care what their personality dynamics are, when you talk to managers about what they like about their job, letting somebody go is never something that we'd like to have to do. Well, what's interesting to me is that both of those questions and the responses to both of those questions get at the reality that if you hire the right person and if you're disciplined and structured in your approach to hiring, and you teach managers how to do that, because it's not something everybody knows how to do instinctively, then it reduces the need later on to have to let people go because they weren't a good fit for the position. Then also, if we provide people with tools and instruction and some structure and support around how to manage performance effectively, how to communicate expectations, how to hold people accountable in a responsible way, then by the time you get to having to make that kind of critical decision about letting someone go, there's less guilt in it because you've followed a process that helps you to make the right decisions all the way along. And so both of those challenges are things that can be overcome with training and support and guidance.
Very well put. Very well said. What does a company need to look for, Eileen, to set up their first-time managers for success? What should a company look for in a new manager?
Well, I think that you have to assess what your leadership culture is and what are the kinds of behaviors you want from managers and be clear about that. So, first of all, knowing what your expectations are. Second of all, communicating those expectations. And then, third, getting a commitment from the person who's moving into that new role that they understand the difference between what they were doing before and what they'll be doing now, and that they are willing to change their perspective, change their behavior if needed, and commit to those expectations. Again, both behavioral expectations, how am I going to act, how am I going to treat people, how am I going to conduct myself, as well as what is the result I'm responsible for achieving, not on my own, but through the people that I work with.
I would think, Eileen, that, and I'd like to hear how you help coach somebody through this. I would think one of the most difficult things for somebody who moves into a new management position is that now they're overseeing people who they used to be peers with, they used to be on an even playing field with, and getting the right balance, I would think, is difficult.
It is, but it goes back to understanding what is expected of you as a manager. Because if I'm a new manager and I've had a meaningful conversation with the leaders, with my leader or the leaders in my organization about what they need and want from me and my department, and I understand that and can articulate that, then I can go to my team and say, this is what's been asked of me. This is how I intend to approach it, and I'm looking for your commitment to help our team be successful. And so, it all goes back to, what do we know needs to be done and how we communicate that, and that we're all on the same page. Because it can be daunting to look your friends in the face and say, okay, now you work for me. But that's really not the way the conversation should be. The conversation should be about how we add value to the organization as a team, and how we can work together to achieve those expectations.
Right. And just to talk about it in a very straightforward manner, but to take it out of the personal like that, as you're suggesting. How about if somebody knows what can be difficult is if several people were up for the position, and you know that if I know that I got the position and several other people didn't, that can be awkward, I think. Do you suggest just addressing that?
I do. I do suggest that you address it openly. I think that as a new manager or any manager, you have the responsibility to get on the same page with each and every one of your employees, and to be candid and to say, I understand we were both in competition for the same position. I value you. I value the work you do. And I hope that you'll continue to contribute and that we can work together as a team, and to get that other person to verbally commit to you that they'll support your efforts. Because, not saying it and not putting it out on the table is leaving room for sabotage. And we don't want to set that up. Now, people come to work wanting to do a good job, and while we might, have our own personal ambitions and things may not always work out the way we want, if we choose to stay, we choose to be at an organization, then we choose to show up and do our job. And it's important for the new manager to gain that person's commitment to continuing to do the best job that they can. And if they are going to have a hard time doing that, then helping them make other choices so that they don't hurt the team and hurt the organization.
Is there anything else that a company should do from the beginning, right from the start? Training, mentoring programs?
Yes, I think that you want to set up certain expectations. You want to make sure that all managers, not just first-time managers, but all managers are held to a set of behavioral and performance expectations, and that you assess what are the needs and talents of the people that you have in your organization, and that you provide skill building if needed, you provide exposure if needed, to different types of situations. But the key is really not making the assumption that everybody knows everything all of the time. And if there is, keeping in mind that the mentoring, it goes outside of one's chain of command. So if you've got high potential people who you're looking to promote, hooking them up with internal mentors even before they move into these new leadership roles, because they'll need help in making that transition. As well as, if there's a training program, or if you have internal or external coaches, depending on the size of your organization, you may approach it in different ways. But, you just don't want to leave people that hang out to dry. You don't want to throw them into the fire and, hope they find their way through it. Some will and some won't, but it's a risky way to go about it.
Right. And as we've heard from Amy at John Hancock and from John at the Bridgeton Hospital, that position and the responsibilities can vary greatly from company to company, depending upon the business they're in.
Yeah, and you know your organization better than anybody else does, and making sure that you, as a leader, articulate to these new managers what you know and understand about your organization and how and what that means when you move into a management role in the organization, so that they can commit to it, get on board, as well as get others on board.
It's the way you described it. It's more than being a teacher. It's more than being a coach, because you also have to keep projects moving, and there are much heavier responsibilities, such as hiring and letting people go. You're asking a lot. For the right person, however, it can be very, very fun and engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people. There are some great managers. There's some great leaders. I've been fortunate in my career to work for some of those folks. I hope that many of the people in our audience have been fortunate to work for people who genuinely love and are good at managing others. And somehow it's one of those things that you know it when you see it. And what we try to do is help people articulate what those things are, what those sort of intangibles are, and make that visible, make that something that we say, this is what good management looks like, this is how it positively impacts our organization, and this is what we expect, and here's how we're going to help you to meet those expectations.
Yeah, as I'm hearing you talk about this, I'm thinking back to people that I've admired as managers, as well as certain managers who discouraged me. And I think that going back and forth and thinking about that helps to set a guide, perhaps, what to do and what not to do as a manager.
Yeah, and do's and don'ts are part of it, but it's really, you can read, hundreds of books, and they all have lists of do's and don'ts. I think that the reality is understanding what works and what's worked for you, and what what you've enjoyed in working for others, and what hasn't worked for you. We talk about it when I coach individuals, or when I coach teach groups of managers. I have them do this exercise that you see on the screen. Draw a line down the center of a piece of paper, plus side on one side, minus sign on the other. On the plus side, write down managers you've worked for. Think about managers you've worked for, you'd walk through fire for, that really inspired and motivated you and helped you to achieve beyond what you even thought your own capabilities were, and what it was that they did. How did they behave? What did they do that led you to feel so positively about them and about yourself? On the other side of the page, write down what it was that they did. If you worked for a manager who, you woke up exhausted, you didn't want to go into work, you thought this is awful, and as we know that, bad managers are the reason why most people leave organizations. If you work for somebody like that, what is it that they did that made you feel like that? And then to take a real hard look in the mirror at who you are and how you tend to behave, and situations that you've been in that were both positive and not so positive for you, and how did you behave in those situations, and see where you fit on that matrix that you've developed. This is something that you can use when you're selecting people to or potentially selecting people inside your organization, asking them to go through this process with you, in addition to whatever other tools that you use in your process to help you and help them make the decision about whether this is the right transition for them, as well as using it as a coaching and teaching tool when moving forward to say, we know in our organization, and here we clearly articulated what we want versus what we don't want, and let's make a commitment to do the things that are on the plus side of the page and limit the things that are on the minus side of the page. And again, making what we call the invisible visible, making the intangible tangible. We know what it is, let's articulate it, and let's live up to those standards.
This is terrific. This has been so informative and so thought-provoking. I want to thank our presenters, Amy Addison, the Internal Sales Director, John Hancock, John Carlson, the President and CEO of Bridgeton Hospital, and, of course, Eileen